Hello, everybody. Welcome to Parables in Pastiche. Urban isn't here right now, and I think the intro ended a little earlier than he expected, so I'll just give an intro to everything. Welcome, Prophet. Hello.
What's up?
And yeah, today I think the biggest focal point and what we're going to base the entire conversation around is just give a sober take on the current positions of the Trump administration, what they're doing, and kind of the implications of the policy route they're taking, and what we might see in the future. And when I said sobering, we mean that in a very serious way. None of us are sycophantic Trump supporters, and it's going to be our job basically in this episode to hold their feet to the fire and also give credit where credit is due, because I think that it's very difficult to get a rational assumption or assessment rather on what this administration is doing, because it's either one side dick riding them like crazy or the other side where they're literal like Hitler sympathizer fascist, so hopefully this episode can give you a more sobering take on everything.
I appreciate the intro. I forgot to click the little button that loops it,
No, all good,
but
man.
I had to go and grab a drink real fast. But appreciate you for covering the intro. Welcome back, guys. This is Parables and Pastiche. I'm your host, Urban, with my two guest hosts, Prophet and Devin, whom you've already met. But let's go ahead and roll the intro. I made an intro, so let's roll it. Alrighty, guys, welcome back. Today, as Devin said, the topic that we're going to be discussing is just what the hell is going on in the world. It's pretty chaotic. You got sides that have already formed, but they're getting deeper. People are becoming more polarized. So today, the title for this show is Trump, Musk, and this dawn of a new day or dawn of a golden era. So, what do you guys think about that? Give me your thoughts. Let's start with Prophet this time, since Devin opened us out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, um, one thing is it's definitely extreme. We haven't seen like change like this and volatility in the government. I mean, at least in my lifetime, and I know that's not much, but and it also seems very interesting how, and this may be a persona, but how um, outwardly tough he is to other people and economically especially, whereas other presidents and administrations were basically the opposite.
Pretty fair. Go ahead, Devin.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing, and really what the dawn of the new day is this idea that infinite government spending and the kind of complete deregulation of the treasury market and the collusion with the Federal Reserve and the primary dealers as well, and this kind of allowing them to spend and lend however they please, might finally be coming to an end. And just the fact that we have Elon sitting in front of the entire cabinet of the executive branch and telling them all that deficit spending needs to stop, that we can't just keep running these insanely unprofitable regimes in government, because we're going to keep inflating our currency supply to infinity, and we'll have no wealth left. And really outlining these issues that have defined what is restricted prosperity for younger people and just normal people in general. It's been bad since the 80s, but it's really since the 2008 financial crisis. This has really affected normal people. Houses have become completely unaffordable for younger people. Groceries get more and more expensive every week, it seems now. And, all these things aren't becoming more scarce per se. It's just simply our currency units being devalued. And the single biggest devaluer of these currency units is the government and its enabling of the banks and the Fed. So, you know, that's the biggest thing that needs to be looked at, first. And that's why Elon needs to be praised and given credit where credit is due, because someone even in the Oval Office questioning this regime, this hasn't really happened since, I would argue, since we were taken off the gold standard. So, this really is the potential dawn of a new day.
So, one thing that just came to mind that I wanted to get everyone's opinion on, because I feel like this applies. In 1913, and I'll put up the graphic. 1913, there was a congressional committee called the Pujo Committee, a congressional subcommittee that issued an influential report in 1913, concluding that a small group of plutocrats, or people who derive power from their wealth, had achieved virtual monopoly control over the American financial system. It was the report of this committee which helped institute the Federal Reserve Act. So the way I read this is, what happens is they kind of say, you got us, you found out what we're doing, but why don't we go ahead and fix it for you? And I feel like that's what's happening now. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a very deep collusion that people are very oblivious to when it comes down to banks and the government. One thing that we were talking about earlier in conversation that I think gets past a lot of people is the fact that banks now own and are such large purchasers of U.S. debt that they have basically become aligned completely with U.S. interest, and this is why bailouts have been, such a massive theme since 2008. They've essentially set up a regime where one is dependent on the other, and this was really started through that committee that you were talking about in 1913. This collusion and the deregulation of the banks just across the board.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Prophet, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it really does seem like you said, they said, oh, well, you caught us, you caught what we're doing, so we'll do something a little bit different, but we're still going to be in control. We're still going to be in power. And I mean, the significance of that committee to me is what's really been done with the information. It seems like the state of banking collusion has just gotten worse over time. I mean, up until this administration, where it seems like maybe something's going to change.
And to keep adding on to that point as well, this bunny hopping of assets, from bubble to bubble is very, very common, and has really been going on since the start of the industrial era. There's always a kind of focal point of a bubble, right? Whether it's an AI driven bubble, an AI speculative bubble, whether it's a housing market, whether it's a government debt, and this is basically how bubbles function just normally through humans. It's like the same fractal as a fashion trend. Everyone adopts a very similar perception, and that basically funnels a lot of conscious energy, i.e., money, investment, whatever have you, and then it buffs up that specific asset or regime of thought and perception. And that's kind of the focal point of what is going on here. And this is why it is so sinister, why when government debt becomes the bubble, it's a lot harder for people to really look at things for what they are, because there's always this argument to be made that it's the government, right? We need to buff up Social Security, and that's almost fascinating too, because when you look at this in hindsight, it's just insane that we're allowing this deficit spending. That we're even allowing a 35 trillion plus dollar deficit. I mean, these things are completely unsustainable. It's almost like blatantly obvious, and it's akin to a person running up credit card debt to massive degrees, but it's just because the institution is so big and people see government as such an infallible entity that everyone looks past it, when it's really one of the biggest existential threats to our prosperity as young Americans. And it affects the global economy as well too, to good degrees.
I think one thing that I keep hearing that doesn't make a lot of sense, or that I think people should know. A lot of people keep saying, "Oh, well, prices are going to go down. Prices are going to go down." I don't see how that will necessarily work when you keep expanding the money supply. So you keep printing more money. It only works one way, because the more money you have in circulation, the less valuable the dollar is. So I don't really know if they're going to be capable of de-inflating much. They might accomplish a little bit, but not necessarily much. You can't just revert what's happened.
No, absolutely. And I just sent you a link to that M2 money supply chart. And that's like a very good point to outline and to keep explaining them on, because you need to, but before you can make real ground in the system, there has to be losers. Okay. And this is the same thing where how government and banks have basically become completely aligned in their interest, because the basis of banks lending is treasuries. It's the same thing when every single mortgage is backed by treasuries. Okay. And housing prices are associated with how much mortgages are going through. If you're in a housing bull market, nobody's worried about buying a house. Mortgages are keep going through. It's big money for banks, etc. Right?
Here, I put that
And
up for you.
yeah. And this big perpetuation of aligning interest is exactly how they get normal people to kind of work against their own interest. Okay. And, I'll go off from that point for a second to explain this chart. So, what we were talking about earlier, okay, with us seeing potential progress, okay, this is a very good barometer to kind of call Trump's and Elon's bluff, okay, because like I said, this is a sober, rational tank. We have to hold their feet to the fire. And one way that I can describe this chart very simply, okay, is that M2 is basically the current amount of, money and cash outstanding in the system, okay? And we've been on an expansion in money supply since World War II, okay? Since they really broke us off from real interest rates, and government spending took over a massive portion of the GDP. Since then, they've had to keep expanding the monetary supply. And this is really the theme of empires in general. You always see a positive inflationary trend, and this is basically how you would see it, okay? Now, one way that we could actually see real material change happening in this Trump administration, where they're changing the fundamental trend of what's happening in the economy, is if this M2 money supply starts going down or even consolidates from here. If we don't keep making higher highs in M2 money supply, that means they're actually starting to restrict spending and debt creation to a certain capacity, and they're actually starting to do their jobs. So this is a very, very good potential here. And if we do not see higher highs to the 25 trillion mark in M2, it could actually start showing results, like real results, that this administration is coming through on their promises to stop systemic inflation in the economy. And another thing too that I want to outline is that if we do see a consolidation here, that will be really the first time since the bottom of the Great Depression we will have seen inflation enter actual negative trend. Okay, so we have been in a positive and inflationary trend, okay, since the worst financial crisis that we have seen in the modern era, some argue. Okay, so that's another thing to think of. Okay, so this positive inflationary trend, we just have to see how much of it will unwind from this Trump administration. How much will they systemically change it? And this chart is the most sobering and best barometer to kind of base everything off of.
One thing I want to do real quick, I've got a short 2-minute clip that explains this fallacy of inflationary Federal Reserve, how money is created. I want to play that just so people are on the same page and understand what we're talking about. Let me go ahead and do that real quick. Just so people understand this fallacy that we're referring to. So, here.
This means that with a $10 billion deposit, 10% or $1 billion is held as the required reserve, while the other $9 billion is considered an excessive reserve and can be
fractional
used
reserve
as the basis
lending, baby,
for new loans. Now, it is logical to assume that this $9 billion is literally coming out of the existing $10 billion deposit. However, this is actually not the case. What really happens is that the $9 billion is simply created out of thin air on top of the existing $10 billion deposit. This is how the money supply is expanded. As stated in modern money mechanics, of course they, the banks, do not really pay out loans from the money they receive as deposits. If they did this, no additional money would be created. What they do when they make loans is to accept promissory notes, loan contracts, in exchange for credits, money, to the borrower's transaction accounts. In other words, the $9 billion can be created out of nothing simply because there is a demand for such a loan and that there is a $10 billion deposit to satisfy the reserve requirements. Now, let's assume that somebody walks into this bank and borrows the newly available $9 billion. They will then most likely take that money and deposit it into their own bank account. The process then repeats, for that deposit becomes part of the bank's reserves. 10% is isolated, and in turn 90% of the $9 billion, or $8.1 billion, is now available as newly created money for more loans. And, of course, that 8.1 can be loaned out and redeposited, creating an additional 7.2 billion, to 6.5 billion, to 5.9 billion, etc. This deposit money creation loan cycle can technically go on to infinity. The average mathematical result is that about $90 billion can be created on top of the original $10 billion. In other words, for every deposit that ever occurs in the banking system, about 9 times that amount can be created out of thin air.
So it's completely illogical, but people need to understand that. That right there, one of the most important things that you can understand about the entire financial system that we've got going. The fractional, like you said, fractional reserve banking is what it's called. And if the people in the audience are curious about it, good luck reading it. But Modern Money Mechanics, which he was talking about, was published by the Fed, and it outlines this process. And, when you have got, like he said, approximately 9 times every deposit being created out of thin air, how is it possible to reduce inflation? So, Devin, how would you respond to that? How would you reduce inflation under that system?
Well, to just outline how a lot of these mechanics work as simply as possible, the basis for what a bank is allowed, so that 1 to 10 ratio that he was talking about, right? The 1 billion turning into 9 billion deposits, whatever have you, is based off of old standards in what we call the triple R, the reserve requirement ratio. Okay. The reserve requirement ratio, okay, in times of like COVID, for example, COVID was so spectacularly unique because the Federal Reserve allowed the primary dealer banks, okay, the largest, most stable banks, they've removed their reserve requirement ratios, okay, allowing them to basically lever infinitely as long as they have their capital parked at the Fed, okay, and we're dealing in treasury collateral. And there's a lot of precedent around how they manipulate the system, how they bail it out, but that is one of the mechanics. It's manipulating these little nuances like the reserve requirement ratio, so it basically frees up banks to spend and lend into the economy infinitely. And this is also why the treasuries and using the treasuries as a mechanism for collateral is so important, because unlike a mortgage, okay, that is tied to a person, or a stock of a company that is tied to a balance sheet and cash flow, a treasury bond is tied to obviously the United States Treasury. And as long as that confidence can be held in the banks, and as long as the Fed is backstopping it enough, you can always kind of infinitely game the system. Okay. And the more and more the Fed accumulates of this debt load, okay, and the same thing of the primary dealers, and the less foreign purchasing of treasuries happen, the more and more they dominate and own this system of collateral. Okay, so it's basically like a 2008 financial crisis, except the mortgage-backed securities are treasuries, and the value of the treasuries are determined by the Federal Reserve that is backstopping everything. And that's where the inflation is actually coming from. It's the philosophy around modern monetary theory and Keynesian economics that allows the central bank to create this infinite perpetual loop of government spending and taxation to pay off interest rates to create this massive Ponzi scheme that we have that is our economy in the modern era.
One thing I heard, and then I'll get your thoughts, Prophet. One thing I heard, I believe it was from one of Tex Mar's presentations or radio shows. He said anything that can be measured, if you can measure something, it can be gamed. If you're able to quantify something and measure it, you can game it. And he compared this to that, the big bull that's on Wall Street. It's got the ring in its nose. And so the ring implies it's symbolic of that measuring. If you can put a ring in something, you could lead it around. Yes.
Well, and also before Prophet, I want to just say this real quick. That's with anything, right? I mean,
Yes.
if you're a real schizophrenic, the butterfly theory, nothing is random. Everything has a reaction and sub-reaction to it. So
cycles.
Exactly. So it's just how much can you understand and engage the complexity at the end of the day, and these systems are gamed and understood at the very high levels, and these cycles, the same way a department store, right, knows how many shirts they're going to sell for a season to a certain degree. Banks know how many mortgages, know how many derivatives they're going to sell to people. All these things are very manipulated in cycles and flows. And there is 100% bigger players that know things are going to happen in advance.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the thing that's on my mind is, with that being said, what have you guys seen Trump and Elon do, and what have they said that they're going to do that would affect inflation?
Devin, I'll let you go first.
No, it really is, like I said at the beginning, coming after the Treasury, right? Starting to hold these policymakers' feet to the fire. The focal point of allowing M2 to expand and to keep, allowing banks to keep getting pumped up and juiced up is literally because we keep having Treasury auctions every month where we give them more collateral, right? We give them more leverage, essentially. Okay, the more treasuries these banks can, take onto their balance sheet, the more yield they're pulling in, and the more credit spreads they can put on. So this is all it's all tied to government spending, in my opinion, because if you take out that key inefficiency, you're going to basically handicap spending at that fundamental level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question would be this. My question is, how exactly would you present this information to the public? So what Elon and Trump are doing, the way that this is being presented by the White House in general, how much is that alike and how much is that different from the game that they've got going on? Because let's just be real here. These people are businessmen. Trump, Elon, they know how to run a business, and they've obviously got some ulterior motive. I'm not saying it's bad, just saying they're definitely running two games here. So how similar are they, would you say?
This is a legacy. This is a legacy setup, and what I mean when I say that is, this is a potential controlled burn of the economy to get things under rein, so that Trump can set up for the last 2 years of his term to really start gaining profound political power. And I think people know what I mean when I say that,
Hmm.
inside Washington. And the Emperor Trump angle will never be able to happen without him doing a real systemic. So here's the thing, okay? If he can really nail this controlled burning of the financial system and do a true systemic wealth transfer from these very predatory flows into treasury markets to banks, if he gets rid of those, if he starts regulating, the banks buying up of all the house, like he could basically like level housing prices pretty effectively by just banning like private equity and banking purchasing of homes to a certain degree. I mean, there's a lot of measures that he could take that would be, very, very pro consumer, very, very pro average American, that would cripple the banks and then start diverting that investment back into normal Americans at the end of the day. Because that's essentially what it is. Like people don't understand, like, how do you think, let me just look. So I'm not talking out my ass, right? How do people think that since COVID, okay, markets have basically doubled? The spy has basically doubled since COVID, okay? Has the American economy and our companies, has everything gotten 2 times? No, the infrastructure has,
Absolutely not.
and that's the point that I try to make to people all the time, right? It's these things are so disassociated from reality at this point. When we see market caps going higher, oh, Nvidia gained $3 trillion in market cap. Hey, Nvidia, they're supposed to be pioneering AI. They're supposed to be making everything better. Everything has gotten shittier, more expensive. Everything has gotten worse. Everything's been getting worse for normal people. And that's what I mean by that diversion of investment, right? We don't need $3 trillion going into Nvidia, okay? Because guess what? We don't need all that material wealth going into it, because at the end of the day, that wealth needs to be going to normal people, because the actual economy is getting strangled. Normal people are doing terrible. You're not going to have an economic base. And I think that's what Trump realizes too. I think that his legacy is aligned with potentially bailing out and saving the consumers from us having to pay off. And this is the thing I've tried to outline to people a lot too. As Gen Z, even the millennials too, we should not be beholden to this debt. What have we gotten from this 35 trillion? Genuinely ask yourself, what have you gotten? Unless you've made it like a bandit, made it out with a bandit from some stupid meme coin, unless you're literally the top 1%, okay? You're getting fucked as a younger person. So it's like, why are we to be beholden to this debt? We need to dump it on the corporations, bankrupt the banks and the corporations, let front the bill, okay? Because that's another thing too, right? These entities thrive through the corporate structure. Okay.
Yeah.
There's not much wealth in if you liquidated all the billionaires, all the shareholders, you'd only get like 4 trillion, 5 trillion if you liquidated everything. Okay. And then it's also not that number's not exact too, because if stock prices collapsed in the liquidity, people don't understand liquidity and all that stuff. Basically, you couldn't get barely anything. You couldn't pay barely any of the deficit if you ate the rich. Okay. Eating the rich is dismantling the corporate structure fundamentally. Okay, because these big CEOs and board members don't need to have all this liquid cash if they can just leverage shares in their political and corporate power, right? So the real power is in the corporate regime, in corporate law, right? And all that structure. So it's like, that's what we need to attack fundamentally, and cutting them off from the balls would be cutting off their funding by regulating treasury markets. That really is one of the most fundamental things to start reining in this whole regime of spending.
Yeah, I would say that the national debt, the way that I look at it, and I'm not saying this is what it means or that it's universal. The way that I look at the national debt is simply as a chain. As the debt grows, we're more locked, we're more chained at the ankles,
Mm-hmm.
and it's debt slavery. And I think it was set up that way. And the reason I say that is because a number, not just one, but one that comes to mind, Thomas Jefferson says, if you ever let a central bank in, you're going to be homeless on the land that your grandparents conquered. And Andrew Jackson went against the banks. Kennedy went against the banks. This is an age-old crusade that's been happening for a long time. And I think fundamentally these central bankers, whoever they may be, let's just say the European banks that set it up, they know that it's debt slavery. I mean, it's not. They know that by by creating this debt out of thin air. That they're enslaving the population. Maybe it might be a good idea. I'll put this up and I'll read it once we get your thoughts from the Devil's Dictionary on the definition of Federal Reserve, because it does a great job at making it clear and understandable. But Prophet, while I do that, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, um, it's interesting to me how most average people, they have a rough concept that, banks aren't the best, but they don't actually understand how banks are coming at us from every single angle, whether it be interest rates on home prices being upwards of really 60%, um, or leveraging the debt to control U.S. Politicians. I mean, it is, to me, the Federal Reserve is the institution that has allowed for this level of influence over our government. And I don't think there's any way to understate that. And on top of that, banks in general, the way that they maneuver isn't good for the average person. The banks are generally screwing people over 99% of the time, you know?
Fair. Let me go ahead and read this. This is from the Devil's Dictionary by Anab Whitehouse, who actually I think he graduated from Harvard. Very smart individual. It's available for free online. I'll put it in the description when I update all that. The Federal Reserve. This is a private banking consortium that A, used underhanded and duplicitous tactics to gain control of the financial system in 1913. B, bows to the likes and dislikes of the International Bank of Settlements, which nobody talks about
Nobody
much.
nobody knows about that. Do you know they have a podcast and an Instagram account?
I did
No,
not.
no,
It's
no one follows them.
based out of Switzerland, which is very important.
Hmm.
An organization which is beyond the reach of the law of fairness, qualities which often characterize member banking systems, including the Federal Reserve. C, funds all sides of wars to make money and create the sort of indebtedness through which it controls governments and citizens.
Hmm.
D, operates on a basis in which money it does not have is lent out at interest it does not deserve. E, continually resists being properly audited. F, has proven to be completely ineffectual in presenting the very kind of financial problems it was allegedly created to solve. And G, for more than a century has proceeded to wield its power in ways which are economically, financially, politically, legally, and socially detrimental to the American people. And among these ways of wielding power is its unwillingness to help create the sort of public banking system, see the work of Ellen Brown and Muhammad Yunus, which would be beneficial to citizens both individually and collectively, but fails to do so because satisfying its lust for money and control is far more important to the Federal Reserve System than is the sovereignty of the people that it claims to serve. What do you guys think about that?
Spitting straight facts from start to finish.
Yeah, it's a good way to sum it up. All of those things are true. We've talked about a handful of those bullet points already, that it's a control mechanism, that the debt is completely illogical, especially when you make one deposit in the bank 9 times, that's created out of thin air. So I think that does it justice pretty objectively. I think all of the things that it mentioned can be substantiated. But what
And I really do appreciate that they mention the Bank of International Settlements, because
yeah,
even when people are talking about the feds and different feds around the world, almost no one knows about the Bank of International
yeah,
Settlements. When I stumbled
absolutely.
upon them, crazy rabbit hole I went down.
Yeah, Switzerland is very important. We won't get too deep into that, but essentially, it would definitely seem like the finance capital of the world would be in Switzerland.
Used to be.
It
It's a
used to
lot more
be.
offshore. It's a lot more offshore now. This is where it gets. It's the euro dollar is a big thing, where the euro dollar is basically offshore dollars, and a lot of that ends up in the islands. You know, but Switzerland is still a pretty big offshore money laundering scheme. But to be completely honest, a lot of shit's just not out in the open now. I mean, it just doesn't like matter. You know.
Pretty true, yeah.
But yes, I would say that what we were talking about last episode, if people watched it with Rachel Sunshine, I think it's leads into what we're talking about right now partially, because what we were talking about, government kind of being the new religion that sets up the moral parameters and social expression of a society. This kind of like religious belief and you know God complex that people associate with the government now allows them to kind of get away with these like extreme redefinings of money and implementations of policy and all that stuff. And another thing too, the king, why were peasants paying taxes to the king? There wasn't a big debt regime then for deficit to be paid and all that different type of stuff. There's always been a sort of tax on the people, and there's always been a reason to justify it in some sort of way, whether it's like interest rates or protection money. It's just the same. It's the same thing at the end of the day. Debt slavery has always ended up being a defining aspect of every empire.
So let me just state this, and let's get your thoughts on it. So one of these documents that I'm reading, it because we were talking about the Bank of International Settlements. It it posits that there are three primary corporate entities that are concerned with central banking. One would be the Holy See, which would be Vatican City Corporation, and the Institute for the Works of Religion, which would be the Vatican Bank. The City of London Corporation, which
Yep.
is independent from London. It is the City of London. It goes back to Rome. It was a Roman trading outpost. You have a lot of guilds, which are essentially private corporations, and the center of the UK's finance. And third, obviously, Washington, D.C., which would be the Federal Reserve Bank, and the District of Columbia Organic Act, which essentially turns Washington, D.C. into a private corporation. So those three would be the primary driving forces of central banking. What do you think about that, Devin?
I'm not too keen on all the very specific stuff with that, just because a lot of that money is very hidden usually. I would say a lot of where this stuff resides is just how the Federal Reserve colludes with other central banks that we are, a part of. So whenever there's like massive crisis that goes on, one of like the defining aspects of being like a very close U.S. ally is that you get direct swap lines. So the Fed will set up dollar swap lines with other central banks. So if the UK is in a massive crisis, okay, and they need lots of dollars to state their debt crisis, then they will basically go to the Federal Reserve and then say, hey guys, we need lots of dollars, but if we were to make dollar obligations with our currency, it would blow us up inflationarily. So they basically set up dollar swap line obligations with the Fed so that they trade euros or pounds with us for dollars in the intermediate term, and it basically injects dollar liquidity into their economy. And this is just like one simple way the US uses dollar hedge, dollar supremacy and dollar hegemony, as one of its, bargaining chips and one of its warfare tactics against its allies. Because if you can create dollar shortages and, supply all your allies with dollars, then, that's where like real manipulation starts taking place, like directly out in the open.
Let me ask this. Maybe you could give me your thoughts on this. So, like you said, a lot of these, for instance, the one I'm going to talk about is Vatican Bank. So, you said a lot of these assets are relatively hidden, and that's true, especially with Vatican Bank. Now, the Vatican Bank has very shady dealings. They don't publish a lot of public information. However, with its age, the Catholic Church been around almost 2,000 years. They hold primarily real estate assets. They have buildings, churches, cathedrals with fine art in almost every single, probably in every single country. And those buildings are architectural marvels. So, what does it mean if the Vatican Bank is holding all of its assets primarily as real estate? What power does that give it in the global sphere?
So this is where this stuff gets kind of schizophrenic, right? So the way that you get money out of those institutions is usually through individual ownership, right? So like, why is the Pope so rich? Why can the Pope basically buy anything he wants? Why does he have all this crazy real estate budget expenditure? Why does he have all these crazy cars? So it's like that, right? Like a lot of cardinals are loaded, a lot of
Yeah.
bishops are loaded, the Pope's always loaded. It's basically kind of and to get into the ownership part of it as well, this is where it gets schizophrenic, like I said, because a lot of this stuff is tied up in trust and holding corporations
Hmm.
where it's like paper trust, where like ownership is actually cut off at a certain level. And like a lot, and not only that, like the rich, the ultra rich don't actually own anything because they
Yeah.
own they own the actual, and this is why I said it gets schizophrenic, and this is hard for people to encompass. That's why I really urge for people to look into the Medici families and the Rothschilds early in their development, when they started really dominating governments and the nobilities and the monarchs during the Napoleonic Wars, is when they really started setting up precedent to control the European banking system. So look into that, and you'll start to kind of understand how this isn't really far fetched at all, and this is how it is. But to say simply, these banking systems cornered ownership in the early 1700s, in the start of industrialization, and they are the base holders of all the trust corporations, and they're the writers of all the law, and they own everything at like a fundamental level, and they're like the definers of everything. It's hard to get into if you understand the history, and I don't want to just start saying stuff because it's not believable. Like if
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
started getting into like all this stuff, and someone didn't understand the history of what these families actually did, and all this like written history that is completely agreed upon, it sounds far-fetched, but like they basically were manipulating wars in favor of whoever. They were like manipulating war bonds of
Hmm.
the French and of the British to like gauge Napoleonic wars in specific conditions so they could make out like bandits. And they literally made governments indebted to them to the point to where they basically seized ownership of key assets of these cities that
The
hold
economic
everything.
hitman.
So they basically, yeah, and that's what happened, right? So governments still maintain quasi control, but they lent the ownership rights over to these families and bankers. Okay, and this is why these cities have these weird zones of like how DC. Okay, DC is like not a city, it's not a state, it's not a country. There's like these weird
Yeah.
holding
City. It's a city
cities.
state.
City state, exactly. And city states used to be a thing back in the day, but they've become a very different entity, right? And they've become a whole different thing entirely. So, and this is where we get into like old law and new law, and how these city states are old forms of law, and that these
Hmm.
old forms of law take precedent. And that's where I said it's schizophrenic. But like
One.
these things are, they own everything at a fundamental level, essentially the foundational level.
Hmm.
One thing that I didn't mention that's worth mentioning, and I won't go too deep into it, but I'll just mention it in relation to all that property that the Vatican administrates, the Vatican Bank. One very important arm that needs to be understood, or at least taken into consideration, is called the Order of Malta, the Knights Hospitallers. They
Yeah.
are a Catholic order, similar to like what the Templars were,
Mm-hmm.
and um, it's very interesting because a lot, for instance, the people who set up the CIA, they were members of the Knights of Malta. The Rothschilds were members of the Knights of Malta, and one interesting thing that I will say about them is that they have permanent observer status at the United Nations. They can't vote, but they're there to watch what's going on. So
Yeah.
why does a Catholic so officially it's for charity? And again, I realize that this is a conspiracy theory, but anytime they say charity, oh, they're doing charity. Usually it's a cover for something. I don't know what. I'm not going to get too crazy, but when they do charity and they're monitoring the United Nations and they're completely sovereign and are full of rich people from all over the world, you do the math.
Hmm.
But I would probably say that the Knights of Malta have something to do with taking the Vatican Bank, obfuscating it, and acting into the public sector, public/private sector.
Um,
And Then you have Maximus Inc., which is a whole other rabbit hole that nobody knows about.
Mm-hmm.
This collusion to really get into, we'll get a little into the schizophrenia with this stuff because
Sure.
Urban
If
started
they
to bring it
if the
up.
viewers don't like it, they don't have to watch us.
Well, no, but I'm saying this happily. I mean, just to give someone some ammo, okay? Rothschild means red shield, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the Rothschilds, family symbol, it's literally a red shield, okay? A red shield in the middle of four different of symbols, okay? And the Knights Templar is a red cross on a shield. It's literally a red shield as well. The Knights Templar was a basic de facto strong arm. These organizations were like the mafia, the early strong arms for the churches. Okay, and that's what these families were really made out of. Okay, they started getting really powerful through these nobilistic church-based systems. Okay, and they simply built these extremely powerful intelligence organizations that were strong arms for their power. And that's why the Knights Templar, okay, that's the Knights Templar, the Rothschilds, apparently that's where they started gaining political power. That's why the Rothschilds were such big power players going up into the 17th century, because they gained all that political power in the early 14 to 1500s through the Knights Templar.
The Templars were one of the first banking systems,
Yep.
according to Jordan Maxwell. Prophet, what are your thoughts?
Um, Honestly, I don't really have many right now. I'm just kind of soaking it all in. Not
Yeah,
very
that's fine.
studied on this subject.
Yeah, it's very, like I said just a minute ago, obfuscated, which means to hide, to kind of muddy the waters so you can't tell what's really going on. And the Vatican has had to deal that way because
Mm-hmm.
again, that's why it's so insidious. I was talking to somebody the other night, and I said one of the reasons that the Vatican is so insidious in its evil, the institution, not Catholic people, nothing against Catholic people, the institution, Rome, the Vatican, the city state, the cardinals, the bishops, the Pope. Why it's so insidious is because when they're going to do their evils, maybe indirectly, they always cover it up or act like they're doing holy work. So they're not going to
Mm-hmm.
tell you to your face, yeah, I know what I just did and I do it again. No, they will tell you the reason that those people had to die in that country is because it was all for God and it was all for the church. And that's why it's so insidious, is because even when they stab you in the back, they smile, and in the gentlest tone, they tell you, oh, God loves you. Jesus loves you. That's why the Vatican's so insidious. And so they have
Mm-hmm.
to kind of work that way, because if the Vatican started pulling strings, it would start to look suspicious. The Vatican Bank is already suspicious as hell. And I saw an article that apparently before Pope Francis was hospitalized, he's been in the hospital for like 2 weeks now, that he had a falling out with the Curia of cardinals regarding Vatican finances.
Mm. Interesting.
Maybe it was just a coincidence, but Pope Francis was concerned with what was going on with finances in the Vatican Bank shortly before he was hospitalized. That's all we know. No conspiracy. He was looking into finances, and now he's having some health troubles. And that's common. There have been a lot of bodies that have turned up in response to P2 propaganda, Due, the Masonic Lodge in the 80s. That was, and this was all, I'm staying within fact right now. The P2 story, you could look into it. There's a lot written about that. The P2 Lodge with the Vatican was seemingly laundering money for the mafia. And I would argue that they probably still are, because if you look at all of the crime families, crime syndicates, even the cartels, and all of South America is primarily Catholic. So that is an element of Vatican canon law. All of the godfathers, all of the made men, all of the cartel mafioso bosses, they're all Roman Catholic. So,
Mm-hmm.
if they did it in the 80s, and all, oh, you're a Protestant, well, we're just going to burn you because it's to save your soul. An institution that does all of these things in history, and recently has been money laundering through their private secret bank, why would they stop? I mean, if somebody can offer me a great simple reasoning for why do we believe that the Vatican has just given this up and decided to change. If somebody can offer me a good reason, I'd be happy to hear it. But the Vatican Bank, the City of London, and Washington, D.C., these are the three strongholds of financial power.
Mm-hmm.
So let's tie that back in. So how does that relate to what Trump is doing, what Elon is doing? Because the Catholic Church has become increasingly liberal. And that's one thing that I've looked into. Apparently, Pope Francis has elevated a significant number of bishops to the rank of cardinal, and he's made a lot of new cardinals who are very liberal. A lot
Well,
of
they're Satanists. I mean,
Vatican II, yeah, but fair enough. But
I wanted to make a joke that if you watch a ceremony that happens inside the Vatican, okay, that's led by a high pope cardinal, okay, if you don't find it a little weird, I would like to question your sanity, to be completely honest.
here's a better question. Let's just ask this question. Well, is there anything wrong with praying to dead body parts? You know, like you cut off some guy's arm, put it in a box, and then you have people pray to it. Is that Christian? Is that Christianity? Or
I don't know. It doesn't sound that Christian to me, but I'm not the
Eh,
arbiter of Christianity.
sounds a little bit Eastern to me, to be honest.
It sure as hell wouldn't be. It sure as hell wouldn't be ethical if you charge people entry to look at it.
well,
Oh yeah, and then remember, it was against God to dissect bodies and any of that
oh,
stuff. But
oh, and also the Pope says that because he speaks for God, aka he's the Godfather. Put it together. Seriously, if the Pope claims to speak for God, if he is the representative of God on earth, well, then technically you could call him the Godfather. But if the Pope is the Godfather, he has papal infallibility, which means anything he says is right. Even if he says the sky is orange, then he's right because he speaks for God. But why is it that the Pope has said my authority is enough to change the Sabbath from Saturday, which if you look in a dictionary, if you put in Saturday in Webster's dictionary, it will say the seventh day of the week.
hmm
So, as far as I am concerned, the Sabbath that we should remember, because the commandment says to remember it, meaning you might
hmm
forget it one day. You might eventually forget the real Sabbath. So the Pope says because he speaks for God, he has the authority to transfer the Sabbath to Sunday. This is their doctrine. And now back to Trump and Elon with the Project 2025 Agenda 47, which are the same thing. Those two documents are the same exact thing. They're going to mandate that Sunday be a day of rest. They're going to mandate the Sabbath be Sunday. So,
So an absolutely satanic institution. If I'm going to
uh,
be a little schizo.
according to all of us, the three of us, I think we would all agree on that. But I won't make up the mind of the audience. These are just speculations and our beliefs.
One thing
But
I'd also like to say is if you are researching words and trying to look up real definitions and what they meant, a great resource is Wiktionary. And one of the key things is if you go in and you look at the removed sources or the um, I don't know what they call them, but it's like we don't accept this anymore. You'll find a lot of interesting associations between words. Like for instance, December is the 10th month.
mm-hmm,
March is the first month if
yeah,
we go by linguistically, but
yes.
for some reason our calendar has been changed. Who knows what that's done to us psychologically.
Who changed the calendar? The Catholic Church.
Yeah, the Catholic Church, because that was the pagan. That was originally the pagan calendar.
The Julian calendar. So here is an interesting, and this obviously borders the crazy line, but this is just an interesting thought experiment. If I was to write a book, me, Urban, Josh, if I was going to write a book and I invented some characters and invented a storyline, then I would have right to that intellectual property, which means if the other, one of you two people wanted to use my characters and my story or make a spin-off, you would need my permission because I own the rights to it. So perhaps there's an element to the calendar change in which the Gregorian, I mean, it is named Gregorian, Pope Gregory, uh, is intellectual property of the Vatican.
Well, I'll tell you what, and this is something that a lot of people will kind of push back on, but at the end of the day, what changes ownership and what makes something real is when you sign on the dotted line. It is your signature. So the fact that he probably at some point signed it into being, and just like you're saying, he
Right.
has put his seal on it. It is, on some fundamental level, whether or not legality reflects that 100%, he owns it, or the
Yeah,
Vatican owns it.
that's true. And if you go back, and again, you go back to the Middle Ages, there is, and these are what you refer to where he signed it. They're called papal bulls. A bull is a lead seal. So you're right. He would seal
Hmm.
it with lead with his seal, a bull. And so a papal bull from the Middle Ages called Unum Sanctum, which means one holy. It asserts that the Catholic Church is necessary for salvation on earth, and that you cannot be saved unless you submit to the Pope. Now, this document has never been repealed, it's never been edited, nor has it ever been argued in court. So, if you look into canon law, it still holds. This bull has been in effect for hundreds of years and nobody's disputed it, or it's not been changed. So, technically, that's official church doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
Devin, what do you think? We're coming up on the hour mark, so let's kind of converge and close this out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's it's one of those things where, as to bring it all back around to what we were talking about at the beginning, as satanic as Elon and Trump probably are, crippling the banking system like they're trying to, and the banking system and money really is the most satanic element of our society. So kind of taming that part of humanity, and taming those animal spirits specifically pertaining to the bubble and currency and inflationary nature of just human power and societies, is the best way to, take away their powers, because at the end of the day, it's the only thing that we can hope for, or, look for in all this, because these old contracts and this old law that we're referring to, is never going to be repealed, right? And it's cool to know about, but it's just it's a lost cause, right? We're too far gone. All we can hope for is salvaging a little of what we have at the end of the day,
So
as shitty as that
what is
sounds.
what is going to let's kind of end it on our thoughts here. What is going so once they, Elon and Trump, once they do what they're going to do with Doge and they audit these banks and they audit the Pentagon, they audit Fortnite, what is going to be step two? What will replace that? And let's remember, we've got Elon Musk with Neuralink, we've got
Mm-hmm.
Peter Thiel with Palantir. So it's set, and I would stand on this. The people who have surrounded Trump, those two, Musk and Thiel, and probably countless others, it would definitely seem that there's a theme. So,
Mm-hmm.
what are they doing this for? What comes after these reforms? Profit.
Mm.
Let's go with profit first.
So, at a first glance, I'd say that they are definitely leaning into the technocracy is the wrong word, but the people who worship AI, the transhumanists, that's the word I was looking for. They're playing
I
to the
would agree.
transhumanist angle. That's the people he surrounded himself with. And if he does, with this step, earn a large majority of the young population's praise, then it would be very easy for him to institute some of these things because people would already be feeling great, and Trump's already done these great things, and most people don't actually look into what's happening and what those things are.
I agree with that. I think that a lot of this is to win favor. Just like
Mhm.
before he took office, that TikTok ban, one day. And so they put
Mhm.
this message up. And that was the weird part. The weird part was that there was a pop up message that says, TikTok is down, but Donald Trump is going to help fix TikTok when he gets into office. That was very interesting. And it's almost like they're trying to win favor. And I did see something yesterday. I don't have it and I didn't read it, but the headline said that Donald Trump was polling very well with young people. So I think
Mhm.
you're onto something,
And then
Devin.
yeah, and a big thing too is, this is just looking at things very matter of fact and realistically, who's going to be pretty much wiped out in the next 15 by in 20 years from now. Any boomer that's left isn't going to be cognizant enough to be voting. That block is going to be completely erased, Okay, so if we're looking at this from a legacy standpoint, okay, Trump really trying to secure the government for the long term, okay, him winning the favor of young people, okay, at any means possible, okay, even if it does require fucking over the elite for a few years, will be extremely advantageous to him. Because I think that if he sets it up, effectively enough, he could really like start dominating things from an
Hmm.
authoritarian perspective, and I think that's what he wants. So
Absolutely.
God bless King Trump.
Absolutely.
Um, that at one point that would have been more of a joke to me, but in a weird way, it doesn't sound so crazy anymore because of that Trump Gaza bullshit. And we've got a golden. So he posts on his Instagram Trump Gaza with a big golden statue of Trump. You've got in Mar-a-Lago, there's a goat. Seriously, there's a goat statue wrapped in dollar bills that say "In Trump We Trust." Trump has posted or his son had posted a picture of him in the mirror as a goat, greatest of all time, goat. But
Well, and just the sycophantic, a lot of people that I saw that were like big Jesus guys, right? Trump became equal or more than Jesus to them now.
I
Hmm.
agree.
Hmm.
I
There is a
definitely
very
agree.
sycophantic love that people have.
Antichrist.
It is a daddy
Yep,
Trump
yep,
deal.
y'all the
It is a
Bayoff.
daddy Trump deal. It really is. It's very
Hmm.
Yeah,
very fucking odd.
and we've long, and this is not new. We've long since passed the point where I say, hey, here is some evidence, or here's something that we should really take into consideration. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying this is interesting. Maybe people should look into this. No, there's no possible. It's impossible that Donald Trump was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. It's not possible.
No, not
It's
at all.
not
No.
not according to the rules of reality. These
He is a
people,
God-fearing man, and you should respect him.
and ultimately on inauguration day, they move the inauguration into the Capitol, and he takes his oath of office underneath the giant mural, the apotheosis of Washington, which apotheosis means to become a god. And so I believe it might have been symbolic. I believe that somebody wants the public to give Trump that God image,
Hmm.
not being crazy conspiracy schizophrenic. But there's a lot, like I said, the way people venerate and ignore information, the way that they believe anything he says, the way that their support is unwavering. Bill
Hmm.
Cooper says in Behold a Pale Horse, he says, never worship a celebrity or a politician, because once you do, you become blind to any of their indiscretions. Once you start worshiping them, you can't see the
Hmm.
information clearly. So there's something to that. And for instance, Trump and his family are definitely playing into it. So maybe it's a joke, maybe we're all
Trump
just
loves it.
crazy. Yeah, and it's
Of
just a
course he
joke.
does.
But again, we've got in the Bible the Antichrist loves gold. Antichrist means against as opposed to Christ, exalting himself higher than others. There's a lot of weird crossovers there, and
Hmm.
I'm not saying that it's divine or anything. I'm just saying something's fishy here, and I would even argue, and I hate to say this, but I would argue that the last person in history that ever had that type of adoration would be Hitler. I'm not Hitler, but I'm not saying Trump is Hitler. I'm saying the way that people talk about and have strong
Hmm.
feelings about the last person that you could say was similar to that was Hitler. But I actually think because we're on a global scale now, because Trump is known in the UK, he's known in Australia, and they're talking about him. Because of that, I would say Trump has probably become more polarizing than Hitler. Again, I'm not saying Donald Trump is like Hitler. I'm
Absolutely.
saying that the character slash individual is extremely polarizing. People either love or hate him. And even when they love him or even when they hate him, it's strong, passionate emotion.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
is there anything else we should cover before we wrap this up? Do you guys have any closing thoughts?
Hmm. I have something that's a bit off course, but I
Put it
didn't get
out
to
there.
mention it earlier. So when we're looking at this, and the arms of these different institutions are very hidden and they're kind of behind the scenes, one way that you can chart out not only the history of how power has developed, but who actually holds power where, is if you can understand what a coat of arms mean. Because you'll realize the Rothschilds' coat of arms, they are holding up the German coat of arms
Have
within
you
that.
seen?
What does that mean? And then what if they're holding wheat or barley? What does that mean? Does that mean they control our food system? So if you can understand that, it will go a long way to actually pointing out where the arms and the legs and the fingers of these institutions are.
That's good to bring that up. Did you know that Donald Trump technically, apparently, has a coat of arms? Did either of you know that?
Well,
No.
most German families do.
Well,
I have a
apparently, there's a
papers.
bunch of news articles that say that he's plagiarized his coat of arms. Right here, let me go ahead and just share it so people can see it since we
Yeah.
mentioned it. That's Trump's coat of arms.
Well, okay. And also the colors mean something too. I believe it was the Illuminati Primer, the book that I read, but it outlines that different colors mean different regions of the world and America as well. So if you can learn to read the symbolism and the colors and what animals are what and what it means, then they're outlining exactly how they're doing what they're doing in their coat of arms, essentially.
Trump, or sorry, when you said symbolism, it was Manly P. Hall, who was a great Freemasonic writer and scholar. He said, once humans learn to read the language of symbolism, a great veil will fall from the eyes of the human family. And I
Mm-hmm.
believe that. I believe symbolism is the relatively the one objective thing that's been relatively the same through history. For instance, Babylon, Egypt, all of these different uh, empires, Rome, they used the eagle or the phoenix. And sure as shit, the United States, the eagle. Freemason has the double headed eagle at 33 degree. And this was odd. Donald Trump gave a speech, and behind him on the set was the American coat of arms, but the eagle head was facing the other way. It was
Mm.
turned towards the arrows, whereas the seal of the United States, it's turned, I believe, it's turned to the left, and it was turned to the right, and that's not an accident. Somebody doesn't just mess up like that. So
Mm-mm.
all this symbolism is very interesting, and I guess my closing thought would be the dawn of a new day, a golden age. This is an ancient occult. The Nazis used it, the communists use it. The dawn of a new day, because all of the lives lost, all of the people who are destroyed in this path, it'd all be worth it for the dawn of a new day, they say. It'd all be worth it if we can enlighten the world. And that's what they think they're doing. They're enlightening the world. They're making us smarter. They know what humans need. They know how to enlighten the human species. And so they're going to do it. And so they're going to bring us the light, the Statue of Liberty, Prometheus. They're going to bring us the torch of intellect. And so they're light bringers. And that's what the dawn of a new day means. And that's the
Very well said.
symbology. And Trump is dripping in it. Golden age, same thing.
Wait,
I mean,
what does the light bringer mean in Latin again? The bringer of
Lucifer.
life.
And that is, for instance, if you talk about it with people, they often act like fair enough, they act like you don't know it, but I'm well aware of it. Are Lucifer and Satan the same? I don't know. I can't conclude. But the word Lucifer, loose, light, and fere means to bring Lucifer, to bring the light. And that's what the Luciferian understanding is. It's that we were held captive in the Garden of Eden and that we were freed by the gift of intellect. And that's an old story. Go back to Greek myth. You have Prometheus, who stole fire from Zeus, intellect. And my opinion is that the Statue of Liberty is in reality a statue of Lucifer. I would say,
mm-hmm.
because liberty from what? The garden? Liberty
Mm-hmm.
using what? The flame? Intellect? So,
And I'm pretty sure in many cases the devil refers to himself and is referred to as the Great Mother. And I'm not sure if that's a pastiche thing, but it is interesting that the Statue of Liberty is female because if we're talking on a symbolic basis, it still adds up. Because Satan's a guy, Statue of Liberty's a girl. What are you talking about?
Technically, the Statue of Liberty is depicted in this way that you could read it both ways, and that's because Satan's technically, at least as his guise is Baphomet, as a transgender, because
Mm-hmm.
they believe that what they believe is that it is a perfect harmony of masculine and feminine energies, and so Satan is a transgender, and that's possibly why
Mm-hmm.
the Statue of Liberty looks kind of masculine and kind of feminine,
Mm-hmm.
both. But that's interesting. I've never heard that great mother analogy. But
Mm-hmm. Now we'll wrap it. Let's wrap it up.
anything from you guys before we close it out?
I'm all good.
Yeah, I'm all
right.
good.
Guys, we appreciate it. This is episode 10. And now that everyone's back around, we hope to crank these out more for you. I think we're going to experiment
Mm-hmm.
with some times. Maybe we'll try to do some shows in the evening to see if we can get more people coming into the stream. But that's all we have for you today, guys. Just kind of a last minute stream and some interesting things to think about. But take care, everybody. We wish you the best, and peace.
Peace.